Hannes Schneider of Austria redefined alpine skiing. He gave it speed and created the first alpine ski teaching system. His influence was so pervasive that many in the sport saw him simply as God, and his disciples were foremost in teaching America how to ski. American alpine skiers fell under the spell of Austrian mountain culture as Austria's alpine ambassadors arrived in the Americas. This film is dedicated to Hannes and his disciples, for whom alpine skiing was the love of their lives, the bread of their existence, their way of life. This is their story, their legacy. The international sport of skiing originated in Norway during the late 1800s, where it stood for personal, spiritual, and national development. Norway's Arctic explorer Fridtjof Nansen, who made the first traverse of the Greenland ice cap on skis in 1888, was a leader in this movement. Skiers in the Telemark district of Norway invented the long, elegant telemark and the short sliding Christie turns, and took them abroad. In Austria, Norwegian downhill technique evolved into alpine skiing, whose goal was fast, controlled descents of the steep and high Alps.
We children used to play in the snow, and my first sight of a skier, I was about maybe 6 years old. It was before World War I started out. And one day I looked up at a hill and I saw a man coming down in slope such as I have never seen. He came down gliding and as though he was flying or walking on air, but he was on skis. I didn't know at that time the skis even existed. And he had his arm outside, stretched side, and he made turns, one after the other, very elegant and very smooth. It was really an astounding sight. So when he stopped, I talked to him. I said, wow, this is wonderful. Can I see what you are using? He showed me his skis, and he said he learned to ski in Norway, and this is what they call a telemark. I said, wow, it's a beautiful thing. Someday I'm going to get a hold of a pair of skis and do it myself.
In Austria, crude homemade skis had been utilized by local farmers for transport.
These types of skis were used for the villagers to bring their supplies up to the huts, and the farmers that brought the butter and milk and eggs down into the village.
But Austria's extraordinary worldwide influence on alpine skiing didn't begin until the late 1800s, when the Austrian Matthias Zdarsky, an engineer and inventor, read Nansen's book, The First Crossing of Greenland. Fascinated by Nansen's story, Zdarsky had a friend bring him a pair of skis from Norway to his hometown of Lilienfeld. A self-taught skier, Zdarsky began experimenting and worked out a new turn, holding skis in a V position, unlike the telemark or the Christie. By using this stem position to break his speed and pivoting his skis around one long pole, Zdarsky kept his speed low, even on steep descents. In 1895, he published the first book on modern alpine ski technique, Lilienfelder Skilauf Technique. He organized the world's first large ski classes in Lilienfeld, and Austria's ski teaching legacy was born. One of the youngsters in the Lilienfeld area during Zdarsky's time was Bill Klein.
We were very fortunate. The town that I come from, or where I lived most of my childhood, was called Thyssen Lilienfeld, where Matthias Zdarsky made his home, and he was well known to be a very active professional. He had ski schools already, and he would help us out in his original Alpine technique, the Lilienfelder Alpine technique. He was very famous throughout Europe because he was also in the Austrian Alpine troops. He had his ski schools all over in parts of Germany and in Austria. He taught as many as 20,000 or 30,000 people.
In the Austrian Alps, especially in the province of Tyrol, there already existed a culture of folk music, conviviality, drink, and dance. As hotels began to stay open for the winter, skiers joined hikers enjoying Austrian alpine culture. Kitzbühel and St. Anton, both in Tyrol, became some of Austria's first and largest winter resorts. To meet the growing demand for learning basic ski technique, summer mountain guides became ski guides in the winter. In 1907, St. Anton's Hotel Post hired its first such guide, Johann Schneider, a 16-year-old ski prodigy. Johann had grown up in the nearby hamlet of Stuben, with his parents wanting to apprentice him to a cheesemaker.
When my father started his ski school in 1907, his parents were worried about how he was going to make enough money. But after the first winter, they saw that he made more money doing that than making cheese.
There was something different about Johann. He sped up Zdarsky's slow stem turns using 2 poles and crouching for stability. And in 1910, he invented an even faster schwinging turn, with skis sliding parallel at the finish.
When he started to ski back then in 1900 or 1910, the big thing was, oh, wonderful, now we have a way to go to the top of the mountain. And Father said that's not going to be the attraction is going to be the downhill. And also said the next attraction in the ski business is going to be the speed you can create. This is why he lowered his body and came out with the crouch. And then he started swinging, as we refer to it. And he found out that it was easier for him.
Johann called his new turn the Stem Christi and taught it as the top turn in a 3-stage method, the Arlberg system. First stage was the novice snowplow, a wide V stemming of both skis. Second stage, the stem turn, stemming just one ski. And the third and final stage, a stem ending in a parallel slide, the Stem Christi, Johann's masterpiece.
One of Father's big saying always was that he would be able to teach everybody how to ski. So he started developing a thing which a novice could learn. So this is how you got started with a snowplow. This is your first time when you learn how to control your speed. And then he started with the turning of the skis, which meant a small rotation going on the outside ski, and you go from left to right. And then from then on in, you went up to the stem turn, you got into steeper terrain. And then, of course, as you got in a steeper terrain, you find out that if you didn't stem as much, that you could ski faster and that the ski would turn easier. So from then on in, once you went by the stem turns into stem Christis, you get more into fall line skiing. And this is then you go back and forth. This is how the swinging, as we refer to it, in Austria, how that got started.
Johann wasn't just teaching the Stem Christi, he was also winning international races with it.
They had already an amateur rule in Austria that he couldn't compete in Austria because he was a professional ski instructor. So my father, he went to Switzerland and he skied for the ski club of Davos. And in 1910 and 1911 at the Swiss Ski Championships, he won the downhill by almost a minute. And the first year in 1910, they all sort of laughed at him as, it's just a show-off, his technique is no good, and so on. But when he came back again a year later and did the same thing, they said, well, there must be something to it. World War I came along, and he went into the army, and then first on the Russian front, then he went down the Italian front, and he happened to run into one of his former pupils who was a general, and he said, he said, we're going to bring you in there to teach the soldiers rock climbing and skiing. And so father was given pretty much a free hand, so this is where he gathered a lot of his experience in teaching skiing.
Throughout World War I, Johann perfected his three-stage Arlberg technique and teaching system. Every 4 weeks, he taught a new batch of recruits how to ski. The training was very disciplined.
In 4 weeks, he had those guys skiing in formation with full back.
When the war ended in 1918, Johann returned to St. Anton, married his sweetheart Ludwina, built a home, and set up his own ski school independent of the hotel post. Austria was destitute. At first, there were no pupils, so Johann taught the Italian occupation troops for free to further experiment with his system. Later, paying pupils arrived. Johann's classes were very different from groups led by hotel guides catering to clients' whims. For instance, latecomers lost their class. But discipline worked wonders. Word of mouth brought more pupils. To teach his growing number of students in the winter of 1919 and 20, he trained 2 mountain guides to be instructors. Meanwhile, in America, there were no mountain resorts offering alpine skiing. An alpine ski culture did not exist, even though ski jumping and recreational cross-country was widely practiced by Scandinavian immigrants. Yet the first American book to illustrate downhill technique, The Winter Sport of Skiing, had been published in 1905. It showed braking with a stick between the legs. In the Austrian Alps, professional ski instructors were not so focused on braking, but rather on teaching skiers to ski fast and in control. This fast and controlled skiing was captured by filmmaker Arnold Funk, a German who pioneered filmmaking in the outdoors.
Around 20, a fellow by the name of Dr. Funk, Arnold Funk, who was a movie maker, he had watched my father skiing in Davos before the war, and he felt that the motion and the fluidity and the beauty of the snow and the skiing, that would be a wonderful thing to put on the screen. And so after the war he got in hold of father, and then they made quite a few movies together.
From 1920 to 1931, Dr. Funk and Johann made films together, some instructional, others adventure fiction. Funk convinced Johann to be known as Hannes, a less formal name, more fit for a film star. By 1925, Hannes was an Austro-German celebrity recognized as an instruction guru, and by 1931, an international adventure film hero.
Those movies, I would say, were one of the main promotion of the ski sport, because a movie were shown on the Ruhr Valley out in Germany, and all of a sudden people realized there was more things to do in wintertime with snow on the ground than just be miserable because you had to shovel it. And this is what brought the people into St. Anton to learn how to ski.
In the early 1920s, Hannes hired only St. Anton boys as instructors.
The ski instructors, they were all farm boys. They never had it so good. They made more money than they ever thought of making.
In 1925, Arnold Funk and Hannes Schneider published Wunder des Schneeschuhs, the first instance when sequence stills from film were used in a book to show maneuvers. It was easily the most popular ski book ever written, eventually selling over 1 million copies worldwide, including translations. Hannes became world famous. Hannes's ski school grew rapidly, drawing upper-middle-class clientele along with high society and public celebrities from around the globe.
Morgen! Auf zum Skikurs!
Needing sophisticated multilingual instructors to service his clientele, Hannes hired Otto Lang from Salzburg, Benno Rybicka, son of St. Anton's doctor, and Luigi Ferger.
Luigi Ferger was probably one of Hannes Schneider's closest friends and assistants. I mean, he was a premier teacher of the tenets of the Arlberg technique.
All three would go on to play important roles in teaching America how to ski.
I had a job as a summer sports director at a place near Salzburg, Zell am See. And it so happened that there was a young man there that worked in a bank, and his name was Benno Rybicka. And in the course of the conversation, I said, "Where do you live?" He said, "I live in St. Anton, and I teach for Hannes Schneider." And Hannes Schneider there had the only well-organized ski school with a ski school plan and instructors from his town and the surrounding villages. So I said, "Well, wouldn't it be wonderful if I could get a job with Hannes Schneider? It would be a dream fulfilled." So I wrote a letter, and about after 6 weeks I received a letter that said, "Yes, I will use you primarily because you speak a smattering of English and a smattering of French. And I have to start building my school on a wider range of teaching." And from then on, I stayed at Hannes Schneider's for about almost 10 years. I taught for him. And we became very good friends, Hannes and I, very close personal friends. And Hannes was really the godfather of St. Anton. I mean, everybody looked up to him with great respect, and everybody asked for his advice.
St. Anton native Franz Gabel, an apprentice instructor who eventually also ended up in America, watched Hannes's ski school and stature grow.
I think there were 40 instructors or so, and average 400 students. It may be more than that. Hannes was more or less the god in St. Anton. He was the greatest name. Actually, in the whole world, he was the greatest name. We knew we'd never be like him. He started it.
The Arlberg system became the official Tyrolean system in 1925 and the official system of all Austria in 1928. Schneider replaced Zdarsky as the authority on alpine skiing. Instructors from all of Europe came to the Bundessportheim, Austria's national sports and ski academy at nearby St. Christoph, to be certified in Schneider's Arlberg system.
Our instructor went to the Hannes Schneider ski school. I think that was in 1927 or 28. And when he came back, we adopted more and more of the Arlberg technique.
The key to Hannes's success was not his technique as much as it was the system of how the ski school operated. The system of putting students in the right class and supervising the classes, so if somebody was below the ability of the others in the class, they moved him down. If somebody was above, they moved him to the next class.
He was the first one who had ski classes where the teacher had to explain first and then demonstrate, and then the pupil does it. And that was a new system in ski school.
Herumlegen. Das ist die berühmte Zwangsstelle. Jetzt den anderen Ski. Höher, hoch. Jetzt herumlegen. So. Das gibt ja auch eine Zwangsstellung.
By the end of the 1920s, certification in Schneider's Arlberg technique and teaching system had become the acknowledged worldwide standard. St. Anton was the world capital of alpine skiing.
And I remember the town of St. Anton when it was nothing but farmhouses, a few hotels and so on, and all of a sudden those farmhouses got filled with people, and in the late 20s people started building more modern houses and have running water in the rooms.
St. Anton wasn't really like an Austrian village like Lech or Zürs or Stuben, but it was the ski school of the world. Not only of Europe, of the whole world.
Easily accessible, St. Anton, strung out along the tracks of the Transcontinental Orient Express, experienced a building boom as more and more skiers came to learn how to ski from Hannes and his instructors.
Skiers would come from all over Europe, from America, from England, Australia, New Zealand. So it became a very international place.
Ski enterprises blossomed, with Hannes's wife Ludvina playing a major role. Ludvina managed the town's first and largest ski store, Sporthaus Hannes Schneider.
My father built a ski shop and my mother ran the ski shop. We had a lot of foreigners in there, so she even opened up a change store, so you could change your marks into shillings and so on. So she was a pretty far-sighted woman, I would say. My mother, I think, in the ski shop made more money than father did in the ski school.
3 events at the transition into the 1930s brought Hannes, and by association St. Anton, even greater notice.
In 1930, the Japanese invited him to come to Japan to teach him how to ski. He went by train, he went to Siberian Express, it took 14 days.
Everybody thought that must be really important, and the reports came back all the time where he was.
While in Japan, he never stayed at one place more than one day. They chased him from one end of Japan to the other one, giving lectures, teaching skiing. One day, he went up on the hill, he had 500 pupils lined up. I mean, his reputation in Japan is incredible, and it's just about every ski area in Japan got a Hannes Schneider hill, they got a monument, or they have something in regards to my father's trip to Japan. So it was a very successful trip for father and his reputation.
In 1931, Schneider co-starred with Leni Riefenstahl in his final film, a romantic ski chase comedy, Der Weiße Rausch, White Ecstasy. In 1927, Great Britain's Arnold Lunn, the inventor of modern slalom racing, visited St. Anton and showed Hannes how to set a slalom course.
Sir Arnold Lunn showed up in St. Anton in 1928. They held the first Arlberg-Kandahar race.
The race was sponsored by Schneider's Ski Club Arlberg and Lunn's Kandahar Ski Club.
That was the first big international competition, downhill and slalom, that was sort of looked upon, well, it's not Scandinavian, we don't need that stuff. My uncle Friedrich won the downhill race. Mostly the local people used to win the downhills because they knew all the shortcuts. So this is the beginning. And it took from there till 1932 before the FS finally had their own championships, Alpine championships. The first time alpine racing was allowed in the Olympics was 1936.
Rudi Matt was the world champion in 1936. Then Willy Walch from Lech. The Arlberg had about maybe 8 guys which could be all in the Olympic team. They were so good.
The Ski Club Arlberg racers were led by Hannes Schneider, chairman of the club from 1929 to 1938. Most of the rivals of these racers came from the Kitzbühel Ski Club. For generations, these 2 rival clubs boasted some of the best alpine racers in the world. The Kitzbühel Ski Club was founded by Kitzbühel ski pioneer Franz Reich, among others. Started in 1931, Kitzbühel Ski Club's Hahnenkamm race came to rival the Arlberg Kandahar as one of Europe's premier racing events, and to this day is considered an important win for those counted among alpine racing's elite. In 1935, Sigi Engel, who would later become influential in American skiing, won the Hahnenkamm downhill on the famous Streif course. Ironically, Austrian racers were banned from participating in the 1936 Winter Olympics in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, Germany. They were almost all paid instructors, and as such lost their Olympic amateur status. But through the years, Austrian racers, like St. Anton's Hermann Scholl in 1936 and Friedel Pfeiffer for the following 3 years, coached American teams, especially the United States women's ski team. When the U.S. National Ski Association failed to field a women's team for the 1936 Olympics, Alice Damrosch Chair created one.
She played a very significant role in women's skiing. I mean, she took charge of our skiing, and she kept a good eye on us. We were her girlies, as she called us. And she was the one that put the 36 Olympic girls team together from the United States.
Daughter of Walter Damrosch, conductor of the New York Symphony, Alice wintered in St. Anton and became a close friend of Hannes. And under Hannes's supervision had Otto Führer, a 3-time winner of the Arleberg-Kandahar race, and Hermann Scholl train them in St. Anton. The first United States women's Olympic ski team raced in the 1936 Winter Olympic Games. Meanwhile, in the United States, the first officially sanctioned downhill races were staged by Dartmouth College's Outing Club on Mount Moosilauke in New Hampshire. The racers' technique was crude, and the events resembled cross-country races. Nevertheless, interest in alpine skiing was growing among America's social elite and influential skiers, a number of whom skied in Europe and either knew Hannes in person or of him through his films and writings. One such person was Catherine Peckett. After skiing in Switzerland, she convinced her parents to keep their exclusive inn, Peckett's on Sugar Hill in Franconia, New Hampshire, open for the winter of 1929. Peckett's became the United States' first alpine resort ski school and soon advertised Austrian instructors. The social and economic elite of the United States flocked to Peckett's to ski. At the onset of the 1930s, a growing political movement started to threaten the United States and Europe, Austria in particular. The Nazi Party was gaining power in Germany and calling for the annexation of Austria. In 1934, Bill Klein and his brother Fred decided to emigrate from their hometown of Lilienfeld, becoming the first members of what was to become a large Austrian ski instructor exodus. By 1936, the Klein brothers were heading the Sierra Club Ski School on California's Donner Pass.
We left Austria in 1934, and we could foresee, the problems coming, what's going to happen politically. And my brother was already at military age, so we decided it was time to leave.
In the spring of 1935, while the United States women's ski team was training in St. Anton, the United States men gathered for the Olympic trials on Mount Rainier in Washington State. The Dartmouth College racers, some of the best Americans of the time, gained the lion's share of the Olympic berths. But Hannes Schroll, an Austrian champion from Bischofshofen, known as the Red Devil of Tyrol, showed the Americans they still had much to learn. He yodeled his way down the courses, winning both the open slalom and downhill national titles. Impressed, Don Tressiter, head of California's Yosemite National Park, hired Schroll to direct the ski school at Yosemite's new Badger Pass slope, at that time the busiest ski school in the country. Another talent had been added to the list of Austrians influencing American skiing. Yet, there was an even more influential Austrian to come. In the fall of 1935, Otto Lang arrived in Franconia, New Hampshire to teach at Peckett's, having met and skied with Catherine Peckett in St. Anton the year before.
Catherine approached me one day and said, would you like to come to America to teach at Peckett's on Sugar Hill? And I said, would I ever? Who wouldn't want to go to America? That was every young man's dream, to go to America and pick up the dollars from the street and shovel them into one's pocket.
With Hannes Schneider's blessing, Otto became the first official Hannes Schneider Ski School ambassador to the United States.
I considered myself with a mission to teach the American people to ski according to the Arleberg theory and practice. Peckett's was a very attractive place, but it was not cut out to be a ski resort or a destination resort. There were no slopes there. It was a golf course. At the same time, there were already two ski instructors there. One was Sig Buchmeier. He was a certified instructor. He was earlier in America than I was, but he made himself a name as a showman, as a personality. He was very likable, very lively. He was a good dresser, and He did a lot for skiing in his way. And the other one was Kurt Oliver, who joined them later. There were two boys from Salzburg. Made themselves already a little bit of a name.
The lack of vertical of Peckett's ski school terrain was partially compensated for by Gemütlichkeit, Austrian coziness and camaraderie, engendered by the instructors and residents. National Geographic magazine would even spotlight that ambience. Still, American skiing had a long way to go. A small ski resort with a touch of Austrian alpine culture did not a ski nation make. For one thing, the United States lacked exposure to proper instruction. Yet help was on the way. In the spring of 1936, Otto Lang demonstrated the Arlberg technique in the film Ski Flight, financed and directed by Otto's friend, Jerome Hill of the Great Northern Railroad fortune.
So after I finished I call it my penance at Peckett's on Hill, I said, well, this is not for me. I got to look for a better place where we can do that film. So we got on a train towards the northwest until finally we espied Mount Rainier from the train, approaching Seattle. And this is where we actually shot a ski film that I called Ski Flight.
The snow creates a sportsman's paradise. Where there's snow, there's skiing. And where there's skiing, there's Otto Lang, the foremost exponent in this country of the famed Arlberg technique. There's a kind of powdered snow out here of a quality that makes for good skiing. It's sleek as butter. It's the technique that really counts. Taking abrupt slopes, that's the very problem that created the famous Arlberg system of Hannes Schneider.
With help from Peckett's frequent guest, Nelson Rockefeller, Ski Flight opened 2 years later at Rockefeller Center.
Ski Flight opened at the Radio City Music Hall in company with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It demonstrated the gist of what the Arlberg technique is about. And it ran there for about 2 months, which was a record time for a film, any kind of a film to run. So that was an incredible, valuable tool to promote skiing in the United States and in the world, because the film went from theater to theater in the world. It was strictly because of Hannes Schneider that the film was made.
In the meantime, Lang had managed to write Downhill Skiing. It was published in 1936 and illustrated with stills from the film.
My book was out. Hannes wrote a foreword, which sort of wound up as the Bible of Arlberg skiing in the United States.
I took that book and studied it and memorized it, had my sister type up notes, and it was a remarkable little book because it had a section on ski mechanics or dynamics of skiing and the psychology of teaching skiing. It was wonderful, the history of skiing. I know a lot of ski instructors that used that little book, clear up until the mid-50s and later.
In the winter of 1936-37, the first official Hannes Schneider ski schools in the United States opened. Otto Lang's at Mount Rainier and Benno Rybicka's at Jackson, New Hampshire. Carroll Reed financed Rybicka's school. Lacking proper instruction and technique, Carroll had badly injured his back in a race on Wildcat Trail in New Hampshire. Determined to set up a ski school that would offer authentic Arlberg instruction in nearby Jackson, Carroll wrote Hannes, who responded by asking Benno Rybicka to take the job. The 1936-37 season opened in America with the 1936 winter sports shows at New York's Madison Square Garden and the Boston Garden. The shows promoted America's fledgling winter sports. The Lake Placid Ski Club paid for Hannes's trip to head up the Alpine demonstration.
He was like a god, and the whole world looked at Hannes Schneider as the greatest skier in history.
Hannes, Benno, and Otto demonstrated the Arlberg technique to over 200,000 spectators.
Here in Madison Square Garden, an artificial ski run takes shape.
The three of us were at a show at Madison Square Garden, which was a typical circus kind of a thing, huge. as only America can put it up with crushed ice. The skiing was not too easy because the snow was very deep and slushy, but it was manageable. And we had a very good showing and very wonderful reception by the public.
While Hannes returned to St. Anton, Benno headed up to Jackson, New Hampshire. Pupils stayed at Whitney's Inn near Black Mountain. The village of Jackson became a destination ski resort. It had an Austrian-led ski school, a fine country inn, and a small mountain. The next winter on Mount Cranmore in North Conway, a few miles south of Jackson, Rybizka opened a second school for American ski entrepreneur Harvey Dow Gibson. Gibson, a Conway hometown boy made good, persuaded Benno to leave half his instructors at Jackson and bring the other half to staff the new school. Gibson also financed a strange lift, a cross between a kiddie car and a funicular, the Ski-Mobile, and renovated the Eastern Slopes Inn, a luxury hotel. North Conway became New Hampshire's top destination ski resort. Meanwhile, Otto had entrained for Mount Rainier in Washington State to inaugurate the first American Hannes Schneider franchise in the American West. Within 2 years, Otto would open 2 additional Hannes Schneider ski schools, one on Mount Baker and another on Mount Hood. Like Rainier, giant volcanic cones with lots of snow and great skiing.
After I opened Mount Rainier, I had my eyes on Mount Baker, which was a marvelous mountain. Mount Baker, I trained some instructors. It was a small version of the Adelberg Ski School. And then the last winter, in 1938, I opened a ski school at Mount Hood, Timberline Lodge, which is the only bona fide destination resort as a ski resort in the Pacific Northwest at that time.
Austrians now had 3 ski schools in the Northwest under Otto Lang, 2 ski schools in California, one under Bill Klein, the other under Hannes Schroll, and 3 ski schools in New Hampshire, one under Sig Buchmeyer, and 2 under Benno Rybizka, and one under Sepp Rusch in Stowe. But these operations paled to what opened in a remote part of Idaho in the winter of 1936-37. The first ski area in the Intermountain West was financed by a very determined and wealthy man. Chairman of the Union Pacific Railroad, Averill Harriman, wanted to increase his passenger business. He thought an Austrian-style destination ski resort along a Union Pacific right-of-way would do the trick. He hired Austrian Count Felix Schafkatsch, whose family wintered in St. Anton, to find a location for what was to become America's premier destination ski resort. Schafkatsch searched the United States and picked a sunny Sawtooth Mountain Valley in Ketchum, Idaho. New York publicist Steve Hannigan dreamed up the name Sun Valley.
Who said Idaho was only famous for potatoes? Nestled in the heart of the Sawtooth Mountains at an altitude of 6,000 feet is Sun Valley, offering winter sports in a summery climate.
Bill Lash, who grew up in Twin Falls, Idaho, remembers the surprise at the resort's opening.
1936, Sun Valley opened 80 miles north of Twin Falls. This was pretty big news in Twin Falls, Idaho. The skiing before that time was unknown to anybody.
To staff the ski school, Count Schafkatsch picked a group of Salzburg instructors led by champion racer Hans Hauser. The instructors were outfitted head to toe in Austrian clothing, complete to the felt hats.
On a Boy Scout trip, we were taught by some of the older Scout master people who had taken lessons at Sun Valley. We were there 4 or 5 days, and on our way back to Twin Falls, we stopped at Dollar Mountain, and I saw my first ski instructors ski down in front of the line with a Tyrolean hat and a Tyrolean jackets. Pretty impressive.
After skiing, the instructors were to be seen around the lodge, especially dancing with the ladies in the Duchen room. Part of their job was to recreate the Austrian ambience of Gemütlichkeit. Austrian Gemütlichkeit, that combination of congeniality and collegiality, was the spirit with which Hannes Schneider and his disciples imbued alpine skiing. Along with Austrian alpine dress, architecture, and decor, American big band music, and in particular that of the Duchin Big Band, became a signature of Sun Valley.
I met my husband in Sun Valley, and he was in ski school there with a lot of Austrians. You had fun in those days. I mean, it wasn't just ski school. You go for an hour and then you're all through. They encouraged the ski instructors to socialize with the guests, and so we used to dance every night in the Duchin room.
Everything was first class, including the world's first chairlifts, a heated outdoor swimming pool, a movie theater, a bowling alley, and a huge lodge. Averill Harriman made sure to supply social register elegance and celebrity shine. He had the means to attract the rich and the beautiful. There was Hollywood glamour.
This was a farming community, and all of a sudden all these important people, movie stars and international people, were right there in their midst. And so the locals, as they're called up there, would go up, and it was quite impressive to us.
Sun Valley's rapid success was attested generous space in the nation's social pages. The press came in droves to cover the vacationing Hollywood elite, like producer Darryl Zanuck and movie stars Gary Cooper and Claudette Colbert. In its first season, 1936-37, Sun Valley generated more stories than all other American ski resorts combined. In North Conway, Harvey Dow Gibson, busy developing America's other destination ski resort, got involved in an international political firestorm. On March 12, 1938, the German army marched into and occupied Austria. It was the Anschluss, the annexation. The curtain came down on Austrian independence. Some Austrians welcomed the Nazis. Others, like Hannes, did not.
Father was always a very outspoken man against Hitler and his nationalism.
The revenge of the Nazis on the Schneider family was devastating. The ski school and the town suffered as a result.
When the Germans came in 1938, I remember it like today, and in the morning they took Hannes away to a jail. And I came to the ski school place, and the other instructors were all sober. Nobody talked. There was no ski school then. People all left in town. They all were leaving.
This gentleman came in and said, "Well, Mr. Schneider, I am from the Gestapo, and I would like you to come with me."
Hannes was placed under house arrest in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, Germany. Hannes's American friends, like Alice Chair, appealed to Harvey Dow Gibson. As president of Manufacturers Hanover Bank in New York and coordinator of American bank loans to Germany, Gibson had leverage over the Nazis. He struck a deal with the Nazis, enabling Hannes and his family to immigrate to the United States.
I remember January 39, I guess it was around the 30th of January, and my mother came and got both my sister and I out of bed and said, "We're going to go to America." We were allowed only 10 marks apiece, and 10 marks at that time were $4, so between the four of us, we had $16. And 5 days later, we landed in New York.
Well, it's very nice to see you. Did you have a good trip?
Oh, yes.
Pleasant
Very pleasant.
Well, that's very nice. We're glad to have you here. You're going up?
I go mit meiner Familie so nach Conway, zur Eastern-Slope Skischule. Sag schon.
And I just can see myself and my sister. We got up in the morning and we looked down on 8th Avenue and 34th Street, and we couldn't get over all the cars because there were only 2 automobiles in the town of San Antonio. And in those days, they had a special snow train that left New York every Friday at 9 o'clock, and he went to North Conway, and he got here at 7 in the morning.
Gibson offered Hannes a family house and a contract to run the ski school at Mount Cranmore. Hannes accepted and joined Benno Rybizka in North Conway. Gibson now had the marquee name in the alpine ski world to head up the Mount Cranmore Ski School.
Hannes Schneider fitted right into the scheme of things at North Conway and found his staff of instructors cheerfully awaiting his arrival.
As we got off the train, it was one of those beautiful winter mornings, clear skies, and you looked up at Washington and said, "Oh, isn't that wonderful?" And then we were told, yeah, but you don't ski up there. So then we got out to Cranmore. As we skied down together, we stopped on the way down, and he said to me, well, Herbert, it isn't St. Anton. It isn't the Alps, but we're going to love it here, and we certainly did.
In peaceful America, Mr. Schneider found crossed ski poles and not bayonets the order of the day. For Hannes Schneider, a new beginning in a new setting.
When Hannes and his family arrived in North Conway on February 11, 1939, Austrians were teaching America how to ski. Austria's Alpine ambassadors, especially Hannes's Arlberg disciples, were leading and developing America's biggest ski schools and ski resorts.
We Austrians in those days, we had pretty much control of all the big ski areas here in the United States. There were quite a few Austrians, especially Arlbergers. This is probably why everybody skied the Arlberg system. When Rubitska came over near in the ski school up in Jackson and then eventually down in North Conway. Then he said, I'm going to need some help, and I want a young racer. So father picked Tony Matt.
Anton Matt fled Nazi-occupied Austria to teach skiing in North Conway. Tony Matt was a top racer for the Ski Club Arlberg and came to America in 1938, where he worked first for Benno Rubitska and then for Hannes at the Eastern Slope Ski School in North Conway, New Hampshire. While in North Conway, he participated in and won numerous races, most notably the 1939 Inferno race. The 1939 American Inferno race took place on Mount Washington, the highest peak in the Northeast. Tony stunned the crowd by making a check turn at the top of the 60-degree Tuckerman Ravine headwall and then taking the 1,000-foot drop straight.
Tony Matt started as a young boy with Hannes Schneider, made himself a name as a teacher and then as a racer, a champion racer. And he came to America and created a legend by being the first one to schuss. That means go straight down Tuckerman's Ravine.
I remember 1939, which everybody, whoever knows about skiing or history of skiing, is when Tony schussed the head wall.
He never meant to do it, but the turn got away with him on top of the mountain, and he had no choice, either to take a horrendous fall or to tough it out and stay on his feet. And he happened to stay on his feet.
He had picked up so much speed that he had broken the record in half. The record was something like 13 minutes, and he skied it in 6 minutes and 29 seconds.
Soon after, Paula Kahn arrived. She was to play an important part in elevating New Hampshire's reputation for skiing. Paula had grown up and learned to ski near Vienna in Glognitz, Austria. With her father, she fled Nazi-occupied Austria and settled in New Hampshire. In North Conway, Paula trained with and was coached by Anton Matt. She became a close Schneider family friend, an American downhill champion, member of the U.S. women's ski team, and eventually co-director of the Franconia Ski School with her husband-to-be, the Swiss racer Paul Valère.
Paula, who got out of Austria, came over by boat with her father. It took them quite a while, and they wound up in New York. But they found out that Hannes Schneider was in North Conway, and Paula wanted to go skiing. So they went to North Conway, and she took up skiing again, which she hadn't done in quite a while.
Boston banker Alec Bright and Roland Peabody, founder of the Franconia Ski Club, convinced the New Hampshire legislature to finance America's first aerial tramway on Cannon Mountain in Franconia. Together with the Mount Cranmore and Jackson resorts, the Cannon Mountain development clearly set New Hampshire ahead of the neighboring state of Vermont in competition for winter tourists.
Then there was Sepp Rusch over in Stowe, Vermont. Sepp was not a Arlberger, but he had made a ski instructor's examination under father, so he was pretty much under the same upbringing or the same technique as we all had.
Meanwhile, in California, skiing had taken off. Sigi Engel, the Kitzbühel racing hero, had arrived in Yosemite.
Sigi Engel was an instructor with a very good reputation. He came from Kitzbühel, but he mixed very well with the Arlberg, because Kitzbühel was followed very much the Arlberg pattern.
Along those lines, there was Lucky Föger, who ended up in Yosemite.
Lucky was very much involved with Hannes Schneider because he was almost called an adopted son. And when Hannes left in 1938, I believe, Lucky went to South America. He was in Chile for one winter, and there he was contacted by the president of the Yosemite National Park, and he convinced him to come to Yosemite. And so that's how Lucky ended up in Yosemite.
At the end of the same season, Hannes Schroll left, and Luigi Föger became the director of the Yosemite Ski School.
Luigi Föger spent a lot of time at Yosemite. He was a wonderful teacher, beautiful skier, good photographer, and a very fine man.
Luigi went on to play an important role in the development of California skiing, helping to start both the alpine meadows and incline ski areas. Hannes Schroll had left Yosemite to raise money for his own resort, the Sugar Bowl. Fellow Austrian Bill Klein helped Hannes discover the Sugar Bowl and later became director of the Sugar Bowl Ski School.
After I showed Hannes the Sugar Bowl property, and Hannes started to bring a lot of San Francisco people into the picture, developed Sugar Bowl. We could see quite a future in it because it was close to San Francisco. It was the most convenient ski area for the Bay Area.
Hannes Schroll convinced Walt Disney and the Hill brothers, Corey and Jerome, to invest in the Sugar Bowl. The main mountain was named Mount Disney after Walt. A 4-story base lodge and the first 2 chairlifts in California were built. The Sugar Bowl, the first American ski resort founded by an Austrian, emerged as the supreme Northern California ski resort. While Schroll was busy founding the Sugar Bowl, Friedel Pfeiffer, winner of the 1936 Arlberg-Kandahar and the Hahnenkamm downhill race, arrived in Sun Valley. Friedel was the last of the Hannes Schneider instructors with a big reputation to immigrate to America.
Friedel Pfeiffer was also a local boy growing up in San Antonio. I think there were 11 children in his family, and they were all farmers, so just tried the best they could.
After escaping Nazi-occupied Austria, he traveled around the world before arriving in New York via Australia in the fall of 1938. Once in New York, he looked up Alice Chair, who had hired him to coach the United States women's team in St. Anton for the previous 2 winters. Alice was delighted that Friedel had escaped and immediately persuaded Averill Harriman to hire Friedel to coach the U.S. women's team, which was now training in Sun Valley for the 1940 Olympics. By the time Friedel arrived in Sun Valley, it had become obvious that there was a lack of discipline in the ski school. Clients, used to better organized classes, complained about the much too relaxed attitude of the Sun Valley instructors. Before the 1938-39 winter was over, Averill Harriman put Friedel Pfeiffer in charge of the ski school. At the end of the season, Friedel fired all the instructors except for Hans Hauser and hired instructors of his own for the next season. At the same time, Friedel persuaded Harriman to build a new ski area on nearby Mount Baldy, served by 3 chairlifts in sequence. This changed Sun Valley from a resort with a couple of minor mountains to a resort with splendid lifts and high mountain terrain. For the next 2 decades, Sun Valley was the United States' premier destination ski resort. One of Hannes Schneider's boys had made a big splash in American skiing. Hannes's influence on American skiing had reached a new peak. By 1940, Hannes Schneider and his disciples' legacy was established. Austria's first alpine ambassadors to the Americas had become pathfinders. Their racing, coaching, and film exploits involved so many in the sport of skiing. Their Arlberg system of teaching and technique made alpine skiing more logical and easier to learn. and their entrepreneurial spirit influenced the development of numerous ski resorts. The entire alpine ski industry was following in their tracks.
Zum